Welcome to the Azure Security Compass. This is a workshop designed to bring together all the best practices that we've learned from Microsoft and our experience going to the cloud, all the investments we've made to make it more secure, as well as all of the things that we've learned from our customers' journeys to the cloud and helping them secure their Azure workloads.
Cool.
So this material is typically delivered in an actual workshop on site with our customers, and we decided that it would be helpful to share this with the world.
Yeah.
And so, we normally go through this first part here, and then we have a little bit of a discussion about the organization's configuration and goals, which we'll touch on in just a moment. And the interesting thing that we found about this is it tends to be it's a discussion with not only the security organization, but also the IT organization as an ideal configuration, because this is really the first time that so many of these roles and stakeholders have had to kind of sit down and look at a new paradigm of how to run their technology space. And so we found it very beneficial to have the networking team, the IT operations team, the SOC team, the security architects all working together to figure out, okay, things are a little different in the cloud. How do we actually get the most out of it so we're not just taking the old practices one for one and having and doing the same thing we've done before? Because there's a lot of that.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I've talked to a lot of customers while doing this workshop, and sometimes it really is the first time that all these different teams have actually talked about what they're doing in cloud. And there are a lot of revelations sometimes, and some discussions that really need to happen as well.
I'm going to reveal a little bit of my gray hairs here, but this reminds me of when we first went to sort of enterprise computing in the early 2000s, late 90s, as Active Directory came online. And it really reminds me of that. Everybody's got to get together and kind of figure out this new system and this new paradigm. It very much reminds me of that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the Azure Security Compass is designed to very quickly increase your security posture. And we tried to get the most prescriptive, the most clear, remove all the "it depends" that we could out of the guidance, and make it as clear as possible that this is the right way to do it from a security perspective. Maybe there's one way, maybe there's a couple ways, and there's a couple choices. And we cover that in a few slides here. We wanted to make it as clear as possible to help people quickly get to the cloud. And of course, get familiar with the Azure platform and Azure Security Center, which is an amazing free tool.
It is.
That really helps get visibility that was just difficult or nearly impossible in practice to do on-premise.
Yeah, and
on-premises, I got it right.
It is a really great tool that lots of people overlook, so we should definitely have a look at it because it is free.
Cool. And one of the big things as we go through this journey, there's two big things that we've learned just from the sort of step back and take a look at it, which is one, it's a mix of the old and the new. So there are some practices that you've been doing from a security perspective that absolutely would carry forward. And then there's some things that are brand new that, like Azure Security Center, that just weren't available before. And there's some things that you're doing what you did before, but it was in a little different way. And so you really have to sort of be prepared to bring your experience to the cloud, but also be ready for changes. Yeah. And so it's very important to have both of those mindsets.
Yeah, it can be, and it does make people feel fundamentally a little bit uncomfortable because we do have to do things a bit differently, but it's something that
part of the journey.
Yeah, part of the journey. Need to approach it with an open mind.
Absolutely. And then the other thing, because we do see on occasion, security people, we have these big egos. We think we have to learn everything. We have to be the expert in everything. And there's an interesting sort of physics problem in the cloud where you just can't, because there's 200 services with a bunch of features under them in Azure, and they're all changing. Yeah. And they're all being added to and developed, and they're figuring out new, better ways of doing things and fulfilling customers' needs and requests in all these ways. By the time if you try to learn 100% of it, by the time you get to 5 or 10%, your knowledge is already getting stale in the beginning. And so it's really important to understand you can't actually know everything about the cloud. You really have to do it on an on-demand basis. Yeah. And that's a big learning for us, especially us security people.
Oh, I know. And I mean, I log into Microsoft tools every day, and sometimes there's something new there.
Oh, look, they added that.
Oh, look, that's new. Yeah. I mean, that happens to me fairly frequently, and that's okay. But as you say, traditional security mindset says, oh, that's something new. I don't know what it is. This is bad. I'm not happy with this. Whereas in cloud, it happens far more frequently.
And it's a good thing, because a lot of times the security gets better. Yep. So the format of the best practices that are in here, we actually use the term, we have a couple of different terminologies that we bring in. The first is best practice, and that's really where there's really one right way from Microsoft's perspective on this is the right way to do this. A perfect example is multi-factor or passwordless for admins. We're always going to recommend 100%. There's no exceptions from Microsoft's perspective. There is a disclaimer at the bottom. But there's never a good reason to just have a password-only admin account from Microsoft's perspective. So that's our clear, just straight-up opinion, no decorations. And there's some cases where there's one or two choices, there's two or three choices maybe, or it's maybe a multi-stage journey, and you have to kind of choose how fast you're going to go down that journey. Or a perfect example of this is whether you use the Azure firewall that's built in, or whether you use a third party, sort of like a Palo Alto or Checkpoint or your favorite vendor. That one is one of the few we actually have a kind of an even it depends, right? Like, there's pros and cons for either one of those. It's pretty simple to manage the Azure one, and it's got some really strong basic capabilities, but there's a lot more features and capabilities from a dedicated firewall vendor. And so that one's one of the few choices that's even. Most of the time we try to nudge in one direction or other to share Microsoft's opinion to help make that choice a little bit easier. Another example is, do you hairpin all your traffic back through your on-prem security stack, or do you set up a security stack in Azure? Because there is a threshold really quickly that you get to in a proof of concept where you don't want to be routing that traffic back.
That particular one I have very strong opinions on when we get to networking.
And it's still a legitimate choice to route it, but it's not one that we would recommend.
No.
And so we do want to give that wiggle room, but the clarity.
Yeah, especially because we can also bring some insight from our customers' journeys around how they've experienced, particularly take the hairpinning. I know for a fact that can cause more problems sometimes as well in terms of troubleshooting, because you just have more stages of your network, the flow to actually troubleshoot. So, we can bring in some insight there as well. But officially it's a choice, of course. Yep. You know your business better than we do.
Absolutely. And again, this is Microsoft's opinion. This is based on our experience with working all of these organizations. You may have special needs in your particular organization that would drive you to a choice that not every other organization would go to. And the other piece that we have here is sort of this green versus gray. And this is a very basic set of prioritizations. So we filtered the green ones, the critical ones, on things that, they're on-premise, typical on-premise security posture. You need this to be parity with them. Things that are hard to change. If you make this decision, it would be a lot of work for you to undo it and make a different decision later. And then high-risk stuff that are things that we've seen, especially in the software-defined networking space. We've seen a few mistakes around public IPs that lead to a high degree of risk. So that's kind of how we filter the critical ones, and all of the other ones are what we put in our general category. And these are all really good ideas. But they're not as important. They're not the things that in most situations we would say, you know what, we can wait on these before we go to the cloud. The critical ones we want to do as we go to the cloud or before. But the general ones, in most cases, can wait.
Yeah, because we know that all organizations, and this is not just security, have limited capacity to do everything. So we're trying to help prioritize those a little bit. Things for your roadmap and things to do straight away.
Exactly, and you always have the choice of when you do each of these, but we wanted to share that. Yep. And we also, in the download section, have a tracking sheet to help you with this, to track when the decisions are being made. Hey, we made the decision on this and we're set to go, and then the implementation of that. How far along are we on getting all the admins to MFA or password lists, et cetera? And so that way you can kind of track that and see where your progress is. And it just makes it a little easier to organize your project.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that we wanted to cover here that comes up often in our customer conversations is there's a lot of compliance regimes, regime probably isn't the right word, a lot of compliance regulatory bodies and standards that organizations have to meet and comply with. And a lot of them are involved in IT security. And not all of those have been updated since the cloud came along and became a popular thing. Yeah. And so the conversation is constantly coming up because organizations are trying to apply compliance standards that were written before the cloud model, and the dynamic ephemeral resources, the elasticity, all those things came along. And so it's very important to understand that there is a distinction between compliance and security, because compliance meets that specific, generally pretty static standard. There's a few of them that are outcome driven, like a GDPR would be outcome driven. But most of them tend to be very specific, prescriptive, control driven. And that's great because it puts you at sort of a minimum baseline of security. But security is really based on the risk and what the attackers could do today and the risk to your business. It's much more dynamic. Yeah. And so it's very important, we found, to distinguish between compliance and security, because they are both moving towards the same goal, but they're taking, a very different approaches to it.
Yeah, and we know that compliance regimes often take a number of years to catch up with the reality of the technology. So that can always be a challenge as well to obviously, if you are a business that's subject to regulatory compliance, you have to adhere to that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that
you're secure against the current threats of today.
That you're actually secure, and that's a big challenge for any business. So.
Yeah. And so we take both of these seriously, but we just want to make sure that folks understand that the dynamics are a little bit different on each of those. And this next piece is just, usually this is how we guide the conversations on, really learning about the organizations that we're working with so that we understand the context of how these best practices will fit for them. But these are the things that in any project you're going to really want to have a good understanding about your own organization. What are you actually doing in the cloud today? We frequently find that organizations are already using the cloud and haven't quite connected the fact that, hey, we're using ServiceNow or Salesforce or Office 365 or OneDrive or Dropbox or one of those, and they've already kind of figured out how to do cloud security to a degree, and they just haven't applied that same set of logic to the infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And so, just understanding that can also help get these folks in the room, some of which don't talk to each other all the time in regular meetings, to actually have good conversations around, oh, well, this is how we did this here.
Yeah, and sometimes this is a really useful conversation with all these teams, because not all the teams always know what's being done in cloud by the other teams. That comes up quite a lot.
Tend to be a lot of bottom-up projects, we found, yeah.
Yeah, people just go buy some machines or paths and go for it.
And then, it's also important to consider, what is security focusing on? What are the initiatives? Is there a particular regulatory regulation that is, hey, we're going to become compliant? Are we trying to do a paperless initiative to get rid of some of the papers and go electronic? Those kind of things that the IT organization or the security organization are driving often really can affect a cloud project and what things go to the cloud first or not. So those are very important things to understand. The next piece is, geographic presence, really understanding, is it, to use your part of the world, is it an organization that only services the Australian market, or is it something that works with the entire Asia-Pacific region, or is it a global organization? So really understanding these helps, shape these conversations and apply the best practices.
Yeah, and because we have so many big focus on, geographic presence and where data resides and geolocation, even in big multinational companies, they can't put everything everywhere necessarily. So that's geographic presence is always an important discussion to have and where things need to be. Because
absolutely,
I don't think I can think of a single organization that doesn't have to consider that to a certain extent nowadays.
Completely agreed. And the next one is the compliance. So depending on where you do business, you're going to be regulated. Depending on what industry, and you're going to be regulated by different pieces. And so that comes into play, because sometimes those compliance regimes require certain advanced security features or certain approaches that would take something that would be a general recommendation and make it critical for you.
Yeah.
And last is really that context of, what are the goals and the plans for Azure usage in general. So what is the organization trying to do? Is it, hey, we're going all in and we've got a date where we're going to turn off the data centers on, June of next year? Or is this something where, we're still in the trial phases and people haven't figured it out yet? So it's very important. Or maybe it's an IoT, like, hey, we're going to do all of our brand new technology there, and then we're going to figure out the old applications later. So, understanding that really affects which elements you need to focus on.
Yeah.
And with that, that is the intro to the Azure Security Compass, and we'll head to the next module. Thank you.